My husband and his mother were stealing from me for 2 years. I found out the hard way. Then I destroyed everything they were counting on. Estimated length, 60 minutes. Narration style, dramatic and intense. What if the two people who were supposed to protect you the most, your husband and the woman who raised him, spent 2 full years quietly planning to take everything you owned? Not in an argument. Not in a moment of weakness. But slowly. Carefully. On purpose. While smiling at you across the dinner table every single night. Welcome to Reddit Revenge Stories. Today's story is the longest and most requested story on this channel, and it comes from a post that became one of the most upvoted stories in the history of Reddit's ProRevenge community. Over 200,000 upvotes. Tens of thousands of comments. People calling it, and I am quoting directly, proof that patience is the most dangerous weapon a betrayed person can have. This is a long story, and it deserves to be told in full, because every single detail matters to how it ends. Get comfortable. Because once this starts, you will not want to look away. Our storyteller, we will call her Claire, was 34 years old when this story begins. She had married her husband, who we will call David, 6 years earlier. They had built what looked, from the outside, like an enviable life. A beautiful home in a quiet suburban neighborhood. 2 successful careers. Claire worked as a senior financial analyst at a regional firm, a job she had worked incredibly hard to earn, climbing from an entry-level position into a role that paid her significantly more than most people her age in that city. David worked in sales for a mid-sized company. His income was steady, but modest compared to Claire's. This was never something that bothered Claire. She had been raised to believe that a marriage was a partnership, not a competition, and for the first several years of their relationship, that belief seemed completely justified. David's mother, who we will call Patricia, lived about 20 minutes away. Patricia had been widowed 8 years earlier, and from the very beginning of Claire and David's relationship, Patricia had inserted herself into nearly every aspect of their lives. Sunday dinners at her house were mandatory. Holidays were planned entirely around her preferences. Major decisions, from where they should live to how they should spend their money, often seemed to require Patricia's approval before David felt comfortable moving forward. Claire had noticed this pattern early on, but she had made peace with it. She loved David. She told herself that a close relationship with his mother was simply part of who he was, and that as long as their own marriage remained strong, she could tolerate Patricia's constant presence. She had no idea that this tolerance was about to be used against her in ways she could never have imagined. Looking back, Claire says the first signs appeared almost 3 years before she discovered the full truth, though at the time, none of them seemed significant enough to raise alarm. It started with small financial requests. Patricia would mention, during a Sunday dinner, that she was a little short on her property taxes that month. David, without ever discussing it with Claire first, would write his mother a check. When Claire asked about it later, David would explain that it was a small amount, that his mother had always helped them when they were younger, and that family was supposed to take care of each other. Claire, not wanting to seem unkind or controlling, usually let these moments pass without much pushback. Over time, however, the requests became more frequent. A car repair here. A medical bill there. Always small enough on their own that questioning them felt petty, but adding up, slowly, into a pattern that Claire would only fully understand much later. At the same time, David began suggesting that they restructure some of their joint finances in ways that, in hindsight, conveniently gave him more direct access and control. He suggested moving a portion of their joint savings into an account that was technically only in his name, explaining it as a tax efficiency strategy he had read about. Claire, who handled complex financial models every day at work but trusted her husband implicitly in her personal life, did not think to question this the way she would have questioned it from a stranger or a client. This is one of the most important details of this entire story, and Claire herself pointed this out in her original post. She said that the very same instincts that made her excellent at her job, carefully scrutinizing every number, questioning every assumption, refusing to take anything at face value, were instincts she had completely turned off when it came to her own husband and her own home. She trusted him. Completely. And that trust was exactly what made the next 2 years possible. Over the next 2 years, a clear pattern began to emerge, though Claire would not be able to see the full shape of it until much later. David's mother, Patricia, began making increasingly direct comments about Claire's role in the family. At first these comments were framed as jokes. Comments about how Claire's career kept her too busy to really take care of David the way a wife should. Comments about how money should not change a person, said pointedly during conversations about Claire's recent promotion. Comments about how some women, unlike Claire, understood that family came before career. David rarely defended Claire directly during these moments. When she brought it up with him afterward, he would tell her she was being too sensitive, that his mother did not mean anything by it, and that Claire should try harder to build a better relationship with her. Meanwhile, the financial requests continued to grow. What had started as occasional small favors evolved into what amounted to a regular, unspoken arrangement. David was, without ever formally discussing it with Claire as a joint decision, redirecting a steady stream of money toward his mother, not enormous amounts that would have triggered obvious alarm, but consistent enough that, over 2 years, it added up to a significant sum. There was something else happening as well, something Claire would not discover until much later. David and Patricia had begun having private conversations Claire was never part of, about Claire's career, her income, and what would happen to that income, and to the assets connected to it, if the marriage were ever to end. At the time, Claire had no idea these conversations were taking place. She continued working long hours, continued contributing the majority of the household income, and continued believing that her marriage, while imperfect in the way all marriages are imperfect, was fundamentally a partnership built on mutual respect. She was wrong, though she would not understand exactly how wrong until a single afternoon changed everything. The discovery happened almost by accident, the way many of the most significant discoveries in life often do. Claire had come down with a bad cold and decided to work from home rather than go into the office. David believed she had gone in as usual, since her schedule that day had originally included an in-person meeting that had been moved to a video call at the last minute. Around midday, Claire heard David's car pull into the driveway earlier than expected. She assumed he had simply come home for lunch, something he occasionally did. She did not think to announce her presence immediately, since she was in the middle of finishing an email in the home office upstairs. What she overheard over the next several minutes would change the entire course of her life. David was on a phone call, speaking to his mother, and he had not realized Claire was home. He was not being careful about what he said, because as far as he knew, no one else was in the house to hear it. Claire heard her husband discussing, in detail, a plan that had clearly been developed over a significant period of time. She heard him reference a folder of financial documents he had been quietly compiling. She heard him discuss specific figures related to her retirement accounts, her portion of their home equity, and a life insurance policy that named him as the primary beneficiary. A policy Claire did not even remember agreeing to increase the coverage on as significantly as he was now describing. She heard him say something that she would later describe as the moment her entire understanding of her marriage shattered into pieces. He told his mother that once they had everything properly arranged, it would not matter what Claire decided to do, because by then, she would have no real way to fight for what she thought was hers. Claire stood frozen at the top of the stairs, completely silent, listening to her husband calmly discuss dismantling her financial life with the same casual tone someone might use to plan a vacation. She did not go downstairs. She did not confront him. She quietly closed the office door, sat down at her desk, and for the first time in 2 years, allowed herself to truly see the pattern that had been forming around her the entire time. Once Claire understood what she was actually dealing with, her professional instincts, the very instincts she had unconsciously suppressed in her personal life for 2 years, came back online completely. She did not say a single word to David about what she had heard. Instead, over the following weeks, she began the same kind of careful, methodical investigation she would have conducted for any client whose financial situation needed to be fully understood before any decision could be made. She started by quietly reviewing every joint account, every individual account, and every document she could access without raising suspicion. She discovered that over the previous 2 years, just over $61,000 had been transferred out of various accounts, in small enough increments to avoid drawing obvious attention, much of it eventually finding its way to Patricia. She discovered that David had, 6 months earlier, increased his life insurance policy on Claire to a significant amount, listing himself as the sole beneficiary, without ever informing her this change had been made. The signature on the increased paperwork did not match her actual signature closely enough to withstand serious scrutiny, something Claire confirmed by quietly comparing it to documents she knew she had genuinely signed. She discovered, through documents tucked away in a folder in David's home office that he had not been careful enough to hide, drafts of legal separation paperwork that had clearly been prepared with the help of an attorney weeks before Claire had any indication David was even unhappy in the marriage. The drafts were structured in a way that, had Claire signed them without independent legal counsel of her own, would have left her with a significantly smaller portion of the marital assets than she was legally entitled to, based on her understanding of the laws in their state. She discovered messages between David and Patricia, recovered through a shared family cloud account that Claire happened to still have access to from years earlier when the family had set it up together, detailing a plan that had apparently been forming for far longer than Claire had initially realized. The plan involved slowly moving assets, building a case that would make David appear to be the more financially responsible and emotionally stable parent should the topic of children ever become relevant, and eventually presenting Claire with separation paperwork at a moment when she would be too emotionally overwhelmed to seek proper legal advice before signing. Claire read every single message twice. She printed nothing yet. She saved everything digitally, in multiple secure locations, and she began, for the first time since this story started, to build a plan of her own. Claire says that in the days following her discovery, she experienced nearly every emotion a person can experience. Grief, for the marriage she thought she had. Rage, at having been deceived so thoroughly by the two people she trusted most. Fear, about what her life might look like if she allowed this plan to succeed. But underneath all of those emotions, she says, was something else. A clarity she had never experienced before in her life. She made a decision that she would later describe, in her original Reddit post, as the most important decision of her adult life. She decided that she was not going to react emotionally. She was not going to confront David in anger, give him the chance to gather his thoughts, adjust his story, or accelerate whatever timeline he and Patricia had originally planned. Instead, she was going to do exactly what David and Patricia had spent 2 years doing to her. She was going to plan, quietly and completely, before anyone realized anything had changed. She contacted a divorce attorney, choosing one outside her own social and professional circles to avoid any chance of word getting back to David before she was ready. She brought every piece of documentation she had gathered. The forged insurance signature. The financial transfer records. The draft separation paperwork. The messages between David and Patricia. Her attorney confirmed what Claire had already suspected. The forged signature alone constituted fraud, a serious legal matter independent of any divorce proceedings. The pattern of financial transfers, properly documented, would significantly strengthen Claire's position in any division of marital assets, and the messages between David and Patricia, while not something that could be used directly in court in most circumstances, painted an undeniable picture of premeditated deception that would matter enormously if the case ever became contentious. Claire began working with her attorney to build a complete legal strategy. At the same time, she began taking quiet, practical steps in her daily life that would protect her financial position regardless of how David eventually reacted once everything came out into the open. She opened a new individual account that David had no access to and no knowledge of, and began directing her paycheck there instead of into the joint account they had used for years. She contacted her HR department to update her retirement beneficiary information, removing David and naming a trusted family member instead. A completely legal and standard action that took less than 10 minutes to complete. She began documenting her own contributions to the household, the mortgage, the renovations, the years of supporting David's career choices even when they meant her own income carried a heavier share of their expenses, building a clear record that would matter enormously if the case ever needed to demonstrate the full picture of what she had contributed to the marriage. Throughout all of this, she continued behaving completely normally at home. She continued having dinner with David most nights. She continued attending Sunday dinners at Patricia's house. She smiled. She made conversation. She gave no indication whatsoever that anything had changed. David and Patricia, meanwhile, continued exactly as before, believing their plan remained completely undetected. Part 7: The Waiting Game. For nearly 4 months, Claire lived a careful double life. During the day, she worked her demanding job exactly as she always had, often using her lunch breaks or short windows of free time to meet with her attorney, review documents, and refine her strategy. In the evenings, she returned home to a husband who had no idea his wife now knew, in complete detail, exactly what he and his mother had been planning. This period was, by Claire's own account, the hardest part of the entire experience. Not because of any single dramatic moment, but because of the constant, quiet exhaustion of maintaining a normal appearance while carrying the full weight of what she now knew. There were moments, she admits, when she nearly broke her own resolve. A particularly cruel comment from Patricia during a Sunday dinner about Claire's priorities. A moment when David, completely unaware of what Claire now understood, made an offhand joke about how lucky he was that Claire worked so hard. A comment that, knowing what she now knew, felt almost unbearable to sit through without reacting, but Claire held her plan together. She continued gathering information. She discovered, through careful and legal review of financial records she was entitled to access as a joint account holder, that the pattern of transfers to Patricia had actually accelerated during this 4-month period, as if David and Patricia were growing more confident, more comfortable, believing their plan was moving forward exactly as intended. She also discovered something new during this period, something that added an entirely different layer to the situation. Patricia, it turned out, had significant debts of her own. Debts she had been hiding from nearly everyone in the family, including, it appeared, from David himself in terms of the full scope. The money David had been quietly funneling to his mother over the previous 2 years had not gone toward minor expenses as he had always framed it to Claire. A substantial portion of it had gone toward covering payments on a high-interest loan Patricia had taken out years earlier. A loan that had ballooned significantly due to missed payments and accumulating interest. This meant that David had not simply been prioritizing his mother's comfort over his marriage. He had, knowingly or not, been participating in a financial situation that put both himself and, by extension, the marital assets he shared with Claire, at far greater risk than Claire had originally understood. Claire brought this new information to her attorney immediately. It did not change her fundamental plan, but it confirmed something important. The situation she was dealing with was not simply a husband who had grown distant or a mother-in-law who had always been difficult. It was a calculated, ongoing financial arrangement that had been deliberately concealed from her for years, an arrangement that had used her own hard-earned income, redirected without her knowledge or consent, to solve problems she had never even known existed. With this confirmation, Claire finalized her plan. She was ready to act. Claire understood that the most important element of her plan was timing. She needed to act in a way that would prevent David and Patricia from having any opportunity to react, adjust their story, hide additional assets, or accelerate their own plan before Claire was ready. Working closely with her attorney, Claire identified a specific window of time to move forward. David had recently mentioned, during a casual conversation, that he and Patricia were planning to finalize what he vaguely described as some updated paperwork together the following weekend. Paperwork Claire now understood, based on everything she had already discovered, was almost certainly connected to the separation plan they had been quietly developing. Claire's attorney advised her that this gave them a clear deadline. Whatever Claire intended to do, it needed to happen before that weekend, before David had the chance to formalize whatever final steps he and his mother had planned. Claire scheduled a meeting with her attorney for the Thursday before that weekend. Her attorney had prepared a complete legal filing, ready to be submitted, that would formally begin divorce proceedings, while simultaneously placing a hold on the joint accounts to prevent any further unauthorized transfers, and formally flagging the fraudulent insurance signature with the relevant insurance company's fraud investigation department.
On Wednesday evening, the night before everything was set to happen, Claire sat down with David for what appeared, to him, to be an entirely ordinary dinner. She asked him a single question, carefully worded, designed not to alarm him but simply to confirm one final piece of information her attorney had requested. She asked him whether he had recently made any changes to their life insurance policies, framing it as a casual question related to some unrelated paperwork she claimed to be organizing for tax purposes. David, completely unaware that Claire already knew the full truth, lied directly to her face. He told her no, nothing had changed, everything was exactly as it had always been. Claire says this was the final moment, the moment that completely erased any lingering hope she had been quietly holding onto, that perhaps there was some explanation, some context she was missing, some version of events where David was not fully, knowingly complicit in what had been done to her. There was no other explanation. He had looked her directly in the eyes and lied, with complete confidence, about something Claire had already proven beyond any doubt. The next morning, Claire went to work as usual. At lunch, she met her attorney and signed every document that had been prepared. By that afternoon, the legal filing had been submitted. The joint accounts had been formally flagged and frozen pending review. The fraudulent insurance signature had been reported. David found out everything that evening, not from Claire directly, but from a formal notification delivered to their home, informing him that divorce proceedings had been initiated and that certain accounts were now under review due to documented irregularities. Claire was not home when he received it. She had, with her attorney's full knowledge and support, already moved a portion of her personal belongings to a secure location days earlier, anticipating exactly this moment, and she spent that particular night at the home of a close friend who had known the full situation from the very beginning and had been quietly supporting her throughout the entire 4-month process. The following days were, by Claire's own description, chaotic in a way she had spent months mentally preparing for, though the reality still tested every bit of that preparation. David called her phone repeatedly throughout that first evening and the following morning. Claire did not answer any of the calls directly. Her attorney had advised her clearly that any communication regarding the situation should go through proper legal channels, both to protect Claire's position and to avoid any possibility of the conversation being twisted or misrepresented later. David eventually sent a lengthy series of text messages, alternating between anger, confusion, and what appeared to be genuine attempts to minimize what had happened. He claimed Claire had misunderstood the situation. He claimed the insurance policy increase had been a simple administrative mistake. He claimed the money sent to his mother had always been intended as a loan that would eventually be repaid. Claire did not respond to any of these messages personally. Her attorney handled all further communication from that point forward. Patricia, for her part, attempted to reach out as well, first through messages directed at Claire, and later, when those went unanswered, through messages sent to several mutual family members, attempting to frame the situation as Claire overreacting to a misunderstanding and damaging the family unnecessarily. This attempt to control the narrative might have worked, had Claire not, with her attorney's guidance, already taken a crucial step. Before any of this became public knowledge within the family, Claire had compiled a clear, factual, unemotional summary of exactly what had been discovered, supported by actual documentation, and shared it directly and privately with the small number of family members and close friends who she knew would eventually hear some version of events regardless of what she did. This meant that by the time Patricia's version of events began circulating, the people closest to the situation had already seen the actual evidence for themselves. The forged signature. The financial records. The draft separation paperwork prepared weeks before David had ever indicated unhappiness in the marriage. The family's reaction was, almost universally, not what David or Patricia had anticipated. Several family members who had previously maintained a polite but somewhat distant relationship with Claire reached out directly to express their support, several explicitly stating that they had long had concerns about the level of influence Patricia held over David's decisions, concerns they had simply never felt comfortable voicing before. Over the following months, the legal process moved forward in parallel on 2 separate tracks. The divorce proceedings themselves, while contentious, were significantly strengthened by the documentation Claire had carefully gathered during her 4 months of quiet preparation. The clear financial record of the unauthorized transfers, combined with the draft separation paperwork that demonstrated premeditation, gave Claire's attorney a strong position from which to negotiate a settlement that fully accounted for her actual financial contributions to the marriage, rather than the significantly reduced settlement David and Patricia had originally hoped to secure through the documents they had prepared in advance. Separately, the fraudulent insurance signature triggered a formal investigation by the insurance company's internal fraud department. While the specifics of how this investigation concluded remained partially private, Claire confirmed in a later update that the policy was formally voided due to the confirmed fraudulent signature, and that the matter was referred for further review regarding potential legal consequences, the exact outcome of which Claire chose not to detail publicly out of respect for the ongoing process at the time of her writing. David, facing both a contentious divorce with strong documentation working against him and a serious fraud allegation tied directly to his name, ultimately agreed to a settlement that was considerably more favorable to Claire than what he and his mother had originally planned for. The settlement included a division of assets that properly accounted for Claire's significantly higher financial contributions throughout the marriage, full removal of David as any beneficiary on Claire's retirement accounts going forward, and a formal acknowledgement, as part of the settlement documentation, regarding the unauthorized financial transfers that had taken place. Patricia's involvement, while not something that could be directly addressed through the divorce proceedings themselves, did not go without consequence. The broader family, having seen the clear documentation Claire had shared, largely distanced themselves from Patricia in the aftermath. Several family gatherings that had previously centered around Patricia's home shifted to other locations, organized by other family members, a quiet but unmistakable signal of where the family's loyalty now stood. In her final update, posted approximately 10 months after the initial discovery, Claire described a life that looked almost unrecognizable from where she had been at the start of this story. She had moved into a new home, purchased entirely on her own, using funds that were now fully and legally protected as solely hers. She had been promoted again at work, a development she attributed partly to the renewed focus and clarity she found once the constant, quiet stress of her marriage had finally been resolved. She described rebuilding relationships with the family members who had supported her throughout the process, and quietly stepping back from any relationship at all with Patricia, a decision she described not with anger, but with a simple, calm finality. She wrote, in the final lines of her update, something that the Reddit community responded to overwhelmingly. She said that the hardest part of the entire experience was not discovering the betrayal itself, but learning to trust her own instincts again afterward, instincts she now understood she had been suppressing for years in her personal life, even while relying on those same instincts completely and successfully in her professional life every single day. She said she had made a promise to herself, moving forward, to never again separate the version of herself who carefully questioned everything at work from the version of herself who deserved to question things, just as carefully, at home. She ended her post with a line that thousands of commenters quoted back to her in different forms over the following weeks. She wrote that 2 years of careful deception had been answered, in the end, by 4 months of even more careful truth. And that truth, once it was finally allowed to surface completely, had turned out to be far more powerful than any plan built on hiding it. Over 200,000 upvotes. Tens of thousands of comments, almost universally expressing the same sentiment. That this was, in every sense, justice fully and properly served. There is something deeply important in this story beyond the satisfaction of watching a carefully built deception finally collapse under the weight of undeniable proof. It is a reminder that the instincts we trust most in one part of our lives, our judgment, our attention to detail, our refusal to accept things at face value, deserve to be trusted everywhere, including, and perhaps especially, in the relationships we hold closest to our hearts. Claire did not win because she was angrier than David and Patricia. She won because she was more patient, more careful, and more committed to the truth than they were committed to their deception. If this story moved you, make sure you are subscribed, because stories exactly like this one come out every single week on this channel. Drop a comment below and tell me, what part of this story shocked you the most? The forged signature, the 2 years of hidden transfers, or the moment Claire heard the entire plan through a closed office door? I read every single comment. New stories are coming, and I promise you, they only get more intense from here. I will see you in the next one. Before you go, if this story kept you watching until the very end, you are exactly the kind of viewer this channel was built for. Check out the playlist right here for more long-form Reddit revenge stories, covering everything from wedding day betrayals to family inheritance wars to workplace revenge that you will not believe actually happened. Do not forget to subscribe. New videos every single week, and longer stories like this one coming regularly for anyone who wants the full, complete version of these stories told from beginning to end. Until next time, trust your instincts, protect your peace, and never underestimate what patience can accomplish. Peace.